Welcome everyone to another wonderful session of 30 minutes with a modern mystic. It's never actually 30 minutes, but the name remains the same. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Sascha. And we're going to go a bit more basic, I believe, this time. Like, what is reincarnation?
What is reincarnation?
Or the purpose of reincarnation?
Or even, do I reincarnate?
All those things all comes under the one headline.
Let me ask you a simple question before we start. When was the first time that you had any contact with the idea of reincarnation in this lifetime? In this lifetime.
Yes.
And how was that?
You have definitely caught me flat-footed here. I'm not sure. I've got about 85 years to scan through here.
Which is proof to all the listeners that none of this is pre-scripted.
There certainly isn't. If they ever needed proof. I honestly can't pick out that moment. I've never considered it when the moment was that I knew I reincarnate, but I can recall having dreams that I didn't understand and were only explained through continuing lives. But it was a long time ago, because I probably started metaphysical traveling, even though I didn't know what it was. I called it daydreaming, but I probably started that as a boy. Not probably, I did. Very simple, in a very simple way. And when you do that, it sort of blows the lid off every concept and every reality. And you listen to your parents talking about things, and you say to them, well, what happens when we, close your eyes and I talk to them about it? And they both looked at me as I was completely stark raving mad. And it frightened me.
So it certainly wasn't through your parents.
I was frightened. They looked at me as if I was a completely raving lunatic or telling the biggest lies of all. And I sort of had to realize that we lived in maybe different worlds. And of course, a child and an adult tend to live in different worlds in some ways, but they do interlink. But anyway, and so somewhere in all those times, I began to find evidence of past lives. And I guess when I go back, it's a long, long time ago that I had the experience I had a past life experience. Probably I was in my early 30s.
Would you like to go into that first experience? Would you like to share that briefly?
I'm just trying to think how it began, but basically I was a son of a wealthy man, and I was in a city, and there was a lot of very poor people, beggars, and I felt a lot of compassion for them. And because my father was very wealthy, I had a sash, or I had my clothing, and I had money in it, and I knew that they used to pick my pocket and things like that. So it became known that I put money in my on me in my various places on my robes so that they could take it. And so I was very sort of well tolerated by the beggars. But one time, I remember I was walking along and I saw a man lying in the gutter, and it had a huge impact on me. I stopped and I sort of knelt down next to him and held his head in my arms, and he was dying. But he looked at me, and there was so much love and vast wisdom and love beyond any comprehension in his eyes as he looked at me. And it had an enormous impact on me. He died. He took a deep breath and died. But in his eyes, instead of seeing defeat and misery and pain and suffering, it was like looking into the eyes of God almost. And it had a huge impact on me. And so I continued to give money away in the way that I did. But one time when I was there, I was 21. And I found again there were no gutters, but on the roadside or the side of where people walked, another man was dying. And when I knelt down, it was the same man. And I just couldn't work this out. It was the same man, and he was dying again. It's like I was caught in a loop. And as I looked into his eyes, there's this incredible peace and overwhelming love. And I said to him, how is this possible? And he said, you simply seek love. And he died again. And I was so affected, I went and joined a monastery. And so I remember all that life. I remember the whole incarnation. I joined the monastery. It was a silent order. You were allowed to speak one Sunday morning in the month. And nobody did because of nothing to say. And so I lived in there like familiar strangers. But I spent a lot of time in meditation and contemplation, which we don't do now. You'd contemplate a flower. And after you've been looking at a flower for maybe 12 hours, and everything changes. You can't keep the flower away from you. The flower and you become one. And it's a fascinating process. After 2 or 3 days, it's the flower, you become the flower. It's completely strange. Nobody does it nowadays. But I practiced a lot of contemplation and meditation. And so I lived my life there. I died at 49, around about 49, and I had a consumption. And my cell, I can see it now. It wasn't a prison cell, but it was a prison. A loveless place. And I died of consumption. But before I died, the night before I died, I dreamt that in my next incarnation, I would discover who I am. I would become self-realized. Well, that was my previous incarnation. My name was David, and it was set in a monastery in northern France. That's where all the action took place. And so this time, I didn't even ask the question, who am I? Until I was about 35.
And so,
but from that moment, it was like getting on a train. I never got off.
Yeah. And so how did that experience take place? Did you go into meditation? Did it come to you as a dream? Was it a conscious decision to explore? How did that happen?
I think I went into meditation. I was in my early stages of meditating. I didn't seem to have early stages. I went in very deep. But then, of course, when I finally realized I'd spent my previous incarnation probably meditating for years and years and years of it, then I realized why I went in deep very fast. It was like something I was so familiar with. And I'd been told it would take me 10 years to learn to meditate correctly. Well, it didn't, let's put it that way. And I plunged straight in. And that was when I was in the community, and we would go into the sanctuary, and I would sit there, and it took on a lovely energy, the room, because all we do is meditate there. And that was when I dived into some very deep ones. And that's when I knew that that we have past lives, and therefore we reincarnate. So it's been with me for a long time.
How did this change your perspective on things? Do you remember that? I mean, it's difficult now because it's so everyday, common, basic understanding for you, but
I can remember I was completely shocked. I was deeply shocked that because everybody thought you died. And that's what shocked me. Apart from a few people in the community, a lot of people, and over the years, a lot of people give lip service to spirituality and reincarnation, but deep down, they still fear death.
Right.
Well, if you know you're immortal, there is no fear of death.
When you experience those past lives, in your first meditations, did you look actively for anything, or was it just you're meditating and suddenly you're in this experience?
No, I went into it fairly fast, very deeply, but I wasn't looking to go anywhere. I was just meditating, and that continued on for years. I'd find myself in, like, the whole of my book, Getting There, or in Europe, the
The
boy
boy
with
without
no
shadow.
shadow.
Mhm.
That all those past incarnations of Adams were all mine,
Mhm.
and they were not nice. A lot of them, not at all nice. And I was never frightened of them because I knew, recalling them, I'd shed a lot of tears. I did a lot of crying. Writing that book, I went through a box of tissues like that because I knew it was real. I knew, I mean, the feelings that went with it.
So how
And I sort of resolved a lot of those then.
so how did it change you the moment that you deeply realized through your own experience, okay, those were my lifetimes, this is not just a one-off thing? How did that change your outlook on everything?
I think it changed me deeply in as much as I knew that although we get old and so-called die, although today I like the word transition, that who I am is eternal. And when you realize that there is no death and that life is a continuity of self or soul, then when you realize that, it changes the way you play the game. I mean, I was, I've got to get spiritual. I've got to save myself before I die because it's all too late. Suddenly, that whole thing is gone. And but as you move into the experience of many of your past lives, you begin to realize that you've been around and had some very profound experiences. And then you gradually begin to realize, is all this experience lost? Every time the body dies, does this all go with it? And then you start again, and gradually you begin to realize that no, all this goes with you, and that you always have it to draw on. But you can't draw on it if the door to that reality, if the doorway to that is closed. And I personally am convinced today that the reason that so many religions, particularly so-called Christian religions, have crucified the pineal, instead of the pineal growing naturally, it's been stunted through certain practices. The pineal is the doorway. It's like the interface between the physical and the metaphysical. So if you close that door, then access to all your past lives, to all you've learned, is denied. Whereas if that is stimulated and open the door, the pineal is open, then you have access to everything you've ever experienced in every life you've ever had, in all your incarnations, because it's all one life and it's one consciousness. But access has been denied to a lot of humans for thousands of years. It's called control.
So now you have a very thorough and deep understanding of the meaning of reincarnation. Going just in linear terms from your first experience, the one that you just described, going forward, what was, let's say, your next level of understanding when it comes to reincarnation and its meaning for humans? Could you,
Well,
is there anything?
it basically made me realize that the end game never came. There was no end game. And so if I committed crimes against humanity in one incarnation, then I would probably have to pay in another. And in many of my incarnations, for instance, I can remember I had an enemy, and it was in the time of Roman wars. The Romans were fighting it's an Eastern word, I can't say the word. Etruscans. They were a race of people, and I remember one incarnation. I killed this guy. The next time he killed me. The next time I killed him. Until we looked at each other and said, "This is ridiculous." And I realized that the stupidity could keep going backwards and forwards over and over and over and over. And so I began to monitor myself in this life, in this incarnation. I began to monitor myself instead of being aggressive and arrogant and various things that I could put out and do very well, to be a bit more humble and to be a little bit more careful. A lot of people say I was still arrogant, but often that was a cover-up for incredibly shy and frightened. You know, the 12-year-old boy was sort of still there, even when I was in my 30s. But so I put on an act. But basically, I began to realize that I'm the creator of my life, because if I have to come back every time and get it right, then I'm creating my life. And my life is not one frame in the movie. The movie goes forever. And each frame is one frame in the movie. And so I decided I would try to improve the movie. And eventually I learned that as I improved the frame I was in, that affected all the frames of the past as well as all the frames of the future. And that was exciting to find that out. Of course, talking about it, one had to be a little bit more careful.
It's very difficult to put this non-linear experience into linear language.
Well, linear, you see, is just a game we play. All time occupies the same moment. But linear gives us cause and effect. And it's probably one of the greatest teaching tools of all, cause and effect. Whatever you do, you're going to get the return ripple. So if you focus on love as much as possible, then love, the return ripple of love, is not quite so bad as the return ripple of dislike and hate.
So just to stay with your own experience for a couple more moments, did you then decide to consciously investigate previous lifetimes, or did you decide that that's not important? How did you, like, for the rest of your life, what importance did this whole discovery of your past lives and reincarnation have for you?
I sort of found that my journey, my spiritual journey, was very much into exploring past incarnations and learning from them and applying it in this life. But it wasn't a path I chose. It sort of chose me. I would sit down and close my eyes and I was in another place and another time. And I sort of knew it was me and what was going on. But a lot of people said they would envy that. And I say, actually, I wouldn't envy it at all. There's a reason we have no memory of past lives, basically, because so many of them are so traumatic.
It's good that you're asking. Yeah, I mean, it's good that you're answering this question already, because this would have been my next question.
Yeah.
I think that is what every person who's skeptical in any way would ask that as the first time, like, why don't I remember any of it?
Yeah, believe me, I had an incarnation back in around the 1600s as a hunchback. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was nothing on me. It was dreadful. Right up from my hump, right up to about the back of my head here. It was horrible. And my it was a rough life. I could feel emotional just thinking about it. It took me literally years to come to terms with that. I was tortured to death because I learned that I was a genius and I could communicate with nature, and I was genius, but I was hideous. I wore a mask. I think I've told you this before. I wore a mask. Remember when I was in Vienna and walked into a mask shop, I wanted to cry. I just wanted to cry my eyes out, and I had no idea why. And then gradually I realized that Jochen, his name, he wore a mask, a leather mask, and he always wanted a beautiful mask. And here I was surrounded by beautiful masks. And it was hundreds of years earlier, and yet the emotional impact, I just stood in the middle of this shop, and they're everywhere in Venice, and I just wanted to cry and cry and cry. I had to cry later that day. I cried my eyes out. No idea why, but I eventually discovered, and it was all to do with Jochen, and it was a terrible, terrible life. And trust me, you really wouldn't want to go back through some of people's, through their incarnations. It would put them into such shock that it could cause them to commit suicide, the one they were in, or completely mess up their life. I could deal with it, but only just. It took me right out on my emotions, and I can still feel the emotions as I think about it. But now it's more of a distant shadow. In the earlier days when it first happened, it was really bad.
So
I
that
remember
brings up.
when I experienced that incarnation, I couldn't relate or talk to anybody for days. I was in such shock.
That brings up an interesting topic, I think.
And you see, when it happened, my back, I was stretched on a rack and died with a broken back. And the next probably 10, 15, 20 incarnations, back pain every time, including this one. Every time something would happen to my spine. I shot in the back, one thing after another. You could see the evidence of that in The Boy with No Shadow. And it was always my back. And this one, once again, at 29, I ruptured the lower spine. And only this time, with enlightenment, it healed.
The question that this brings up is, what's the connection that you see between reincarnation and our emotional bodies?
The emotional body is always with you, and it's always the same body, and it's either growing or not growing. It's the powerhouse.
Let's take it, since we're trying to do basics, let's take one step back. So when you're saying it's always with you, we're talking about a human being as a soul, right? As a soul with some bodies.
As a soul, you have a mental and emotional body. That's metaphysical. And that is in a long, long stage of development. It's not about the development. The mental body is not about really so much the development of the intellect, although that's an aspect of it. It's about the development of intelligence and wisdom, because intelligence has no limits. There is no limit. You don't reach an upper limit, or you reach the scale of 180 or 200 on the IQ test and you can't go any higher. That's just a game we play. And so you're all the time developing that. But as we move into higher levels of consciousness, the mental and the emotional are inclined to fuse into one. So the mental has to be very steady, and the emotion has to go from the highs and the lows to what I call emotional balance. And so eventually, by the time we're six-dimensional beings, the mental and our language is emotional, which is like 1,000 times richer than anything we can speak or think. It's the emotions fuse with the mental, and so you're communicating in energy rather than just words. Words carry energy, and you can see that in a great orator or an angry person. You're aware that words carry energy. But when you get to the sixth dimension, words carry so much energy that as you communicate telepathically with another person, you're creating visions and scenarios and pictures. And it's like a communication beyond anything. Well, this is human, and it's because of our emotional body, and not many other beings that I've met have that emotional ability. So in fact, we're quite unique so far as I'm aware, we're quite unique out there in the universe in our ability to communicate with a richness beyond anything else I've encountered in anything so far. And I've met a lot of beings, metaphysical.
Now, here that's touching on another interesting topic. Is reincarnation reserved for human beings in your experience?
Is it?
Is reincarnation something reserved to human beings only, or?
Do you know, I'll be honest, I don't know. I suspect not. I suspect not, because it's not a beginning and an end. It's just dropping away form. And I would say that it ends when you drop away physical form. And so the time you get into the higher dimensions, there would be no resistance, there would be a continuity and a flow to growth. But even then, there could be some form of checks and balances.
So would it be fair to say that we only experience, or we only go through the mechanism of reincarnation because we mess up too much?
It's simply that we live in a way that our body can't retain its integrity.
Self-destructive.
Because every attack thought is attacking every cell in your body. So when you're thinking, I'm not good enough, or you're angry with yourself, you're in fact attacking your body. And so gradually you're depleting the potential energy. We should live 140 years. This is biologically proven. And the fact that we get more closer to halfway there, it gives a degree of our self-attack.
And I mean, there are some ancient scriptures that speak about a time when humanoid beings, let's say, were up to 700, 800, 900, or 1,000 years old, and it was pretty normal, and they did not look old at that age. And that would speak for them living a life that kind of does not disintegrate their body, right?
Yes, that's right. You've also got a big, like there's so many frames of reality. It's like we think three dimension is one. There are many frames of three-dimensional reality. Some of those, but I'll keep out of that because that's going to cloud the issue.
Like you're in a living room and I'm in a rainforest.
The fact of reincarnation, the real fact behind it is we're not born and die. We are a soul, immortal and eternal, and the continuity, it continues. It just continues. We're not all wise and all knowing souls. Basically, on this planet, we're younger souls in development. And although there's no linear time applied to it, there is still, let's say, conceptually younger and more ancient. And even if you take away linear time, there is the vastness of experience, for instance, and that has to be counted. I mean, when you consider there are races that have evolved and gone before we ever got here, there's a lot going on out there. But when you begin to look at it, I am an immortal being and I'm an eternal being. And each incarnation is like a day in the life of eternity. And so I wake up in the morning and there's another day, and I go to sleep at night. We call that death, and we wake up to another day in eternity. When you realize that you're eternal, then you can to quite a degree cut out the crap of life and start to live in a way that you know is going to take you smoothly and more easily through the incredible suffering that we managed to create. I mean, we are so full of suffering as human beings. We've got that down to an art form, and it doesn't have to be that way. We never had to suffer. We created it. Well, actually, once you realize you incarnate, you very quickly learn, okay, I won't create more suffering for myself. I'll create a smooth, my life becomes a much easier process.
So if you had to
finally learn there's only one way to do that, and that is love.
So if you had to answer the question, why do we reincarnate, with just a simple answer, what would it be?
we get worn out.
Okay.
Physically, we wear out.
Right. Okay. Because of our emotional and mental immaturity.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't make us bad or wrong.
Just terrible.
No, it doesn't make any of that. It just means that we have no idea. We're completely ignorant of who we are.
Like kids.
Just as the caterpillar keeps crawling until the moment of the metamorphosis, we keep suffering until the moment of metamorphosis. When you become enlightened, seriously, you cut down on the suffering. Seriously.
Here's another question. Given the fact that our emotional and mental bodies do remember, do carry on these memories and energies of all these experiences, of all those lifetimes, where is the disconnection, or how does it work that we, through our brain, usually, in most cases, don't remember? Is there like an energetic wall that is kind of, because it's, since our mind, our brain is part of the mental body or is an expression of that, is it just a block of access, restricted access?
It's in consciousness.
Okay.
It's in consciousness. It's not really so much the brain. We give a lot of credibility to mental memories. They are therefore in this life, and they come from the brain. The right tend to be the old memories of the right hemisphere of the brain. But as overall, the emotions have far the most powerful memories. They would carry far more, and then we get cellular memories. So when you gradually realize that mental, emotional, cellular, and all that moves into the consciousness, so we have a memory in consciousness, then when you incarnate, and there's some serious stuff left that's got to be dealt with, because you cause and effect, you've got to deal with the effect, then you'll find you'll have a cellular memory, and the cellular memory was carried with the consciousnness. And so there is we all have cellular memories, very strongly so. And like a child, let's say, at 3, sits down, walks over to piano, plays around with it, and then is suddenly playing Beethoven. Or something like that. No, we've got a child prodigy. They played the piano for a whole incarnation, and is so deeply impressed in consciousness, and is so deeply coming through into the cellular memory that the fingers, even though it's a new body, the fingers have the memory, and they start playing, and within a few months, the child is playing incredible stuff, Rachmaninoff, and there's so many examples of this. Certainly it has to get the dexterity back and all that, but this is so well recorded.
Oh my God, we've talked more than half an hour already, and we haven't even gotten to the practical part of it. Let's do it still. How on earth can you use how should we use the idea and the understanding of reincarnation for our benefit? What's the best, the easiest, the most practical way for the listeners to implement it in their day?
Okay, well, nothing you do has an end. And so whatever you're setting into action, you're going to have to follow it much, much further than the end of your present incarnation. So I would sow things that are positive and loving, that lift you, and life becomes absolutely wonderful. Your accidents disappear, so much disappears that we take for granted. Even aging can slow right down. And so it's basically, if I was to say one thing, I'd say live a life of honoring yourself and other people, and you can't go wrong.
So you would not support the idea of looking into past life specifically, or any of that?
No, I wouldn't say do all that at all. I didn't have much choice. I'm not sure that I'd have chosen it, but it worked for me. But we're all different. And I would basically say, look on yourself as an eternal being, and that what you sow, you're going to reap. if you sow honoring self and honoring other people, and everybody knows what honoring means. Love can be ambiguous, but honoring self, honoring other people, you will emerge into the brightest light and the best incarnations possible.
Isn't that a coincidence that this happens to be written on your t-shirt?
Yeah. If you honor self, you honor life. If you honor life, life will honor you.
You have to pull it further up until you're naked. And then we get censored. Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. I think it was a great and very enlightening talk again. I hope this
Thank you,
has,
Sascha.
I
Thank
think,
you.
I hope that this has inspired listeners to take action on whatever that means. Like and comment and share this episode with friends, loved ones, your parents, your daughters, your sons, your husbands, your wives, and support Michael however you like.
I would also recommend you take on the fact that you are an immortal, eternal being and live life accordingly. So honoring self and other people puts you in the best place at the best time, and God will smile on you. Well, I'm a bit tongue-in-cheek with that, but life will smile on you, certainly.
In honor, au revoir.
See you next time.